What if I told you that the greatest betrayal in history began with a single empty room? Are you ready to learn the truth about how human greed destroyed a vast empire in just a few weeks? The Spanish conquistadors, led by Francisco Pizarro, found themselves in the very heart of a foreign and unfamiliar land.
They held the ruler, Atahualpa, captive, but became hostages to their own success.
Finding themselves completely isolated among the high mountains. Imagine this absurd situation. A tiny group of people, surrounded by hundreds of thousands of enemies, possessing the greatest treasure in history, yet feeling the noose around their necks tightening ever tighter. In today's video, we'll take a detailed look at exactly how these tense negotiations unfolded, who was behind the decision to execute them, and why the Spaniards took this step despite the ransom having been paid in full. Watch the video until the end.
You'll find out how tons of gold couldn't buy a single man's life.
Like this video right now if you enjoy historical investigations, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss our next videos. Get comfortable, pour yourself some tea, and let's dive into this incredible story together. Are you ready for the shocking truth? The room that became the epicenter of the Inca Empire's collapse was a completely ordinary stone building in the city of Cajamarca. It measured approximately 22 feet long and 17 feet wide. In ordinary times, this small structure served as a simple military storage facility or soldiers' barracks. None of the builders could have imagined that these bare walls would become the measure of an entire nation's worth. Francisco Pizarro and his detachment of 168 men found themselves in an extremely difficult tactical position. They controlled a vast territory, but were trapped in a stone city with no connection to the coast. All around them stretched rocky mountains, concealing tens of thousands of loyal Indian warriors. The Spaniards constantly expected an immediate attack, organizing round-the-clock armed sentries on the fortress walls. Tension among the conquerors grew with every hour spent in the cold conditions of the highlands.
Atahualpa quickly realized the main weakness of his conquerors, hidden behind their heavy steel breastplates.
He noticed their incredible craving for the yellow metal, which the locals considered merely a decorative material. In Inca culture, this metal had exclusively aesthetic significance, symbolizing sunlight. The ruler decided to use this unique weakness as the sole means of his liberation. He proposed a deal to the Spaniards, the logistical scale of which still boggles the imagination. The ransom chamber became the physical embodiment of the clash between two completely different economic systems. For Atahualpa, it was a simple logistical task of moving decorative elements from distant temples. For the European soldiers, this room had become a veritable treasure trove, the very reason they had crossed the ocean. Every day, the soldiers came to the building to take in its imposing rectangular dimensions. They tried to imagine what such a vast quantity of yellow metal gathered in one place would look like. The conquerors established the strictest possible physical control over access to this stone building. A special round-the-clock guard was organized, consisting of Francisco Pizarro's most trusted men. No one was allowed to enter without a special pass from the military command. The room became the center of daily life for the entire Spanish camp. Drawing the gaze of the guards, the wait for the first convoys turned into a serious test of the nerves of the isolated military detachment. The first days after the treaty was signed brought no visible changes to the empty room.
The Spanish soldiers began to doubt the sincerity of the captured ruler's intentions
and his ability to gather the cargo. Fears arose that the delay was being used solely to concentrate a massive local army. Tension in the camp reached such a level that some officers suggested an immediate retreat to the ocean. However, the commander sternly quashed any talk of a possible withdrawal from the fortified city. The logistics of this transport operation were unprecedented for the 16th century. A vast administrative system voluntarily handed over its material resources to a small group of foreigners. This transfer of valuables is unparalleled in terms of its scale and speed of execution across difficult terrain. We'd love to hear your perspective. What do you think of Atahualpa's decision to trade the empire's riches for his freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Guess what happened next? The collection of the ransom quickly escalated into a systematic seizure of valuables from all major administrative centers of the empire. Endless lines of people carrying heavy metal loads began streaming in from remote mountain towns. These were massive pieces of metal crafted by local jewelers over many decades. Gold plates were dismantled from the walls of temples, forever losing their original purpose. The Spaniards demanded ever new shipments, watching intently as the designated space slowly filled. They meticulously recorded every large item brought in, weighing it on makeshift field scales. Heavy cast fountains, figures of agricultural plants, and massive ritual cups were brought into the room. Some items were so large that they had to be pushed through the doorway with great effort.
The conquerors ignored the quality of the craftsman's work, evaluating only the final weight of the metal.
Atahualpa personally oversaw the arrival of shipments from his place of confinement in Cajamarca. He sent new messengers with orders to speed up the dismantling of panels in the most remote southern provinces. The ruler was absolutely certain that meeting the set quota would guarantee his restoration to power. He often spent time conversing with Spanish officers, discussing the speed of new caravans' arrival. During this period, a semblance of diplomatic communication developed between the prisoner and his guards. The conquistadors, watching the growing mountains of metal, began to experience entirely new fears. The more gold panels accumulated in the building, the more they feared losing this cargo. In the fortified camp, instances of internal mistrust and conflicts between individual units became more frequent. Pizarro was forced to significantly increase the number of sentries around the treasure building. The half-filled room became a source of constant psychological pressure for the soldiers. Against the backdrop of this concentration of wealth, the sense of isolation from their main supply bases intensified many times over. The detachment was thousands of miles from safe harbors, surrounded by an unfamiliar rocky landscape. Any misstep could lead to a loss of control over the situation in the city. Communication with the coast was maintained with great difficulty via rare and vulnerable mounted couriers. The metal in the room was tangible, but the chances of successfully transporting it to the ships seemed minimal.
During this period, a significant shift occurred in Francisco Pizarro's strategic planning.
He realized that Atahualpa retained absolute control over the transportation system even while in custody. This meant that the monarch's influence remained an insurmountable factor, regardless of whether the ransom terms were met. The release of such an administrative leader threatened all of the expedition's future plans. The command began secret discussions of options for action once the red line was crossed. The room gradually filled up, shortening the time until the inevitable denouement of this historic standoff. Both sides found themselves firmly bound by the physical confines of a single small rectangular room. The situation grew increasingly complex with every new ingot brought in and flattened. The ransom collection process demonstrated the supreme efficiency of Inca logistics under critical conditions. Do you think the local officials could have refused to carry out this order from their ruler? The secret that people pay thousands for lies in the Inca's incredible transportation system. Moving hundreds of tons of gold panels through the rocky gorges of the Andes was a massive logistical challenge. The metal was transported exclusively by human labor without the use of draft animals or carts. The Incas utilized their extensive network of stone-paved roads running through the mountain ranges. This infrastructure enabled a continuous flow of valuable cargo toward the besieged camp. The engineering structures of the road network consisted of deep cuts carved directly into the solid rock. The width of these paved routes allowed porters to walk in an even line, several people deep. On the steepest slopes, builders had carved out high stone steps in advance to ensure a safe ascent. Deep river canyons were crossed via long suspension bridges woven from thick plant fibers. It was along these treacherous paths that dense columns of people carrying metal cargo moved.
Transportation was carried out using a well-established system of passing cargo from one group to another.
Each team of porters was responsible exclusively for its specific section of the mountain trail. Upon reaching a special stone rest stop, they handed the heavy bales over to a fresh group of people. This logistical solution allowed the caravans to maintain the fastest possible pace along the route. Spanish observers noted the incredible speed at which the convoys arrived from the most remote locations. Organizing such long columns required the strictest oversight from the administrative apparatus. The caravans were accompanied by counters who recorded the amount of metal being transported at each stage. They used a complex system of knots and colored cords to accurately record quantitative information. Not a single gold panel was lost along the way, thanks to this reliable system of mathematical accounting. Government officials carried out the assigned logistical task with absolute precision. Traveling across high-altitude mountain passes demanded tremendous physical endurance from the people. Porters crossed sections at altitudes of over 15,000 feet above sea level. The lack of oxygen and the cold mountain winds seriously hampered the progress of the heavily laden columns. The weight of the rigid metal plates pressed down on their shoulders, making every step on the slippery rocks more difficult. Thick clouds of fog often concealed dangerous cliffs at the edges of the narrow transport trails.
As they approached the city, the separate caravans merged into a single, massive human stream.
On the narrow trails just before the entrance to Cajamarca, dense traffic jams of porters formed. They patiently waited their turn to carry the cargo through the line of Spanish checkpoints. The sight of these endless processions made a strong impression on the European infantrymen. Massive metal elements slowly floated over the people's heads to the storage area. Each new shipment of metal was thoroughly inspected by European inspectors. The conquistadors forced the exhausted porters to carry the heavy items directly into a designated room. There, the flattened items were stacked to minimize the amount of empty space between them. The available space in the room shrank inexorably with each new day of uninterrupted deliveries. The Europeans saw the results of a perfect transportation network serving their interests. This logistics system operated without a hitch, despite the extremely challenging mountainous terrain. A massive amount of gold was transported hundreds of miles within a strictly defined time frame. The process completely depleted the reserves of many central temples, leaving them with bare stone walls. Completing the transport mission became a priority for all the administrative districts involved. The flow of people did not cease until the gold level approached the target mark. The organization of thousands of porters on narrow trails served as a model of resource management at the highest level. Ancient engineering infrastructure withstood the colossal strain of the ceaseless movement of the convoys. This logistical achievement commands respect for the precision of its planning and execution. People proved their ability to quickly move enormous loads across mountain ranges. If you enjoy learning about such unique historical facts, be sure to like this video. What if everything you were taught is outdated? We're used to thinking of gold as a finished work of art, but here it was just ore. When the metal reserves hit rock bottom, the Spanish command made a tough decision. They flatly refused to transport hundreds of items of various shapes in their current state. A massive process began to melt down the entire collection into ingots that were easy to transport. By order of Francisco Pizarro, local Native American metalworkers were summoned to the camp. They were tasked with remelting all the delivered items into standard rectangular Spanish ingots. To accomplish this task, 9 large smelting furnaces were urgently built within the city. Metallurgical work was carried out around the clock to speed up the process of preparing the cargo for shipment as much as possible. Thick smoke from the continuously operating, red-hot furnaces constantly hung over the plaza of Cajamarca. Large metal panels and vessels were fed into the fire one after another without pause. Massive chunks of gold quickly lost their original shape under the influence of high temperatures. Spanish guards stood beside the furnaces, strictly monitoring every drop of molten material. They kept a close watch to ensure that not a single ounce of the precious raw material left the smelting area. The collected metal was transformed into perfectly identical bars, bearing the clear stamp of the Spanish crown. The smelting process took an enormous amount of time and required the fire to be kept constantly burning. Every day, hundreds of pounds of gold carried by porters disappeared into the red-hot crucibles. The molten metal had to be purified of accidental impurities to produce ingots of the required quality. The smelters worked in conditions of unbearable heat and under the constant supervision of an armed escort. It was a grueling physical routine that transformed the city into an industrial metallurgical zone. The officers selected only a few individual items for direct shipment to the Spanish monarch. A small number of sculpted pieces, which stood out for their unusual size, were preserved. The silver elements were remelted in a separate section, as this process required different conditions. Huge silver plates were first chopped into small pieces with heavy tools. The clanging of metal hammers and the hissing of hot crucibles continued for several weeks. The Spanish military camp had turned into a noisy and dirty, non-ferrous metal processing plant. The conquistadors methodically prepared their cargo for the long ocean voyage. Atahualpa watched the smelting furnaces at work from the building where he was being held. For him, the transformation of the metal had no fundamental political or strategic significance. He had fulfilled the condition of providing the agreed-upon amount and was awaiting a response from the command. The ruler did not interfere with the industrial process organized by the Spaniards in the central square. The operation of the furnaces simply marked the completion of the stage of collecting the enormous ransom that had been set. The transformation of the metal into rectangular ingots shifted the mood within the Spanish camp. The soldiers saw the finished chests and knew for certain that the cargo was fully ready for transport. The metal lay before them, but its presence did nothing to improve the complex tactical situation surrounding the city. The command's confidence began to give way to an anxious analysis of the current military situation. Was this small force ready to face the consequences of its stay in the mountains? Against the backdrop of rows of ready-made ingots, the Spanish detachment was plunging into a state of severe tactical crisis. It was a turning point when control of the city's perimeter demanded the utmost concentration of forces. The soldiers found themselves trapped within the stone walls of Cajamarca, surrounded by mounting uncertainty. Fatigue from the long wait gave way to paralyzing tension in the face of the unknown situation in the mountains. Isolation from the main supply routes was becoming physically palpable for every infantryman. Mounted scouts began bringing back extremely alarming reports from the surrounding mountain valleys. Unverified information emerged about a massive concentration of Indian forces to the north. The reports claimed that local generals were gathering thousands of men to block the exits from the gorge. Every day, sentries strained their eyes toward the rocky passes, expecting large detachments to appear. Night shifts turned into an exhausting test of vigilance due to the anticipated surprise attacks. Francisco Pizarro made enormous administrative efforts to maintain order within the units. He personally inspected the night watches, checking the men's readiness to repel a possible attack. The commander quashed any talk of panic, harshly punishing violations of the chain of command. However, maintaining strict order became increasingly difficult due to the general fatigue of the troops. The situation inside the fortress teetered on the fine line between organized discipline and chaos. The pressure was exacerbated by the specific climatic conditions of the city's high-altitude location. Frequent torrential rains and sharp temperature fluctuations wore down the men manning the open posts. The unit's medical support was minimal, which exacerbated the effects of colds. There was a critical shortage of medicines to maintain the health of the entire garrison. The unit had reached the limits of its physical capabilities in the mountain climate. From his assigned quarters, Atahualpa observed changes in his guards' behavior. He tried to ease the tension by pointing out the absence of any actual military movements near the city. The ruler logically argued that his subordinates would not take action without a clear order, but the European officers ignored these arguments, trusting only the reports from their own reconnaissance teams. The dialogue between the command and the imprisoned leader had reached a complete impasse. The officers increasingly insisted on a radical change in the unit's tactical position. They argued that the only way to secure the perimeter was to eliminate the cause of a possible blockade. According to their calculations, the presence of the living leader was the main factor keeping local forces around the city. As long as the leader remained in the building, the garrison remained a potential target for a coordinated strike. The demand to resolve this issue by force began to dominate military councils. Pizarro found himself faced with the extremely difficult task of choosing the expedition's next course of action. Eliminating the ruler violated the initial agreements and deprived the Spaniards of an important political lever. Maintaining his status as a prisoner jeopardized the safety of all the gold concentrated in the city. The stakes in this strategic game had reached a critical point, demanding a final and irreversible decision. The situation required an immediate end to the state of static waiting within the Ring of Mountains. The command crisis in Cajamarca marked the moment when the unit's resources were stretched to the limit. The ingots were ready for shipment, but they kept the heavy infantry firmly tied down to one specific location. The garrison found itself in a tactical deadlock, trapped between the metal warehouses and the mountain passes. Ensuring a safe withdrawal became the commander's top priority. This is what happens behind closed doors when vast material resources are divided among people. Before making military decisions regarding the withdrawal from the city, Pizarro initiated the distribution procedure. The division of the finished ingots became the most complex accounting operation of the entire expedition. All standardized bars were counted and prepared for strictly regulated distribution. This technical procedure took place inside the most heavily fortified building, guarded by arquebusiers. The process of physically distributing the ingots was accompanied by rigorous checks of records and cross-referencing of lists. Many infantrymen expressed dissatisfaction with the calculated ratios, considering them unfairly low. Officers had to resort to disciplinary measures to maintain order in the line for metal. Each recipient was issued a paper certificate confirming the legitimacy of the medal they had received. The accounting records were finally transformed into heavy bars in the hands of specific soldiers. The quantities of metal issued represented colossal economic assets for ordinary people. An ordinary infantryman received a weight equivalent to the income from several decades of continuous work in the metropolis. Many members of the detachment instantly secured their financial future for the rest of their lives. However, these heavy pieces of metal were completely useless under the conditions of a mountain blockade. The real purchasing power of these ingots could only be realized after returning to the ships. As expected, the distribution of the cargo led to a sharp decline in internal discipline among the personnel. Gambling card games began in the camp tents, with the freshly cast ingots serving as stakes. It became extremely difficult for commanders to force soldiers, burdened with heavy trunks, to go on night watch. Focus on military tasks gave way to thoughts of how to safely transport personal belongings. The garrison's combat effectiveness dropped to a critically dangerous level. The detachment under the command of Diego de Almagro, which arrived later, was not included on the list for receiving ingots. This strict accounting decision sparked an immediate organizational conflict between the two groups of troops. The reserve soldiers demanded a change in the distribution ratios and a recalculation of the total available gold. Pizarro was forced to provide written guarantees of future payments from territories not yet conquered. These financial disagreements laid the groundwork for future structural divisions within the army. Atahualpa was aware that the process of distributing the metal collected on his orders was nearing completion. The terms of the agreement had been fulfilled. The required amount had been delivered, melted down, and distributed to the soldiers. The ruler expected the immediate removal of his guards and the granting of freedom of movement. He conveyed through interpreters an official demand to end his detention. The situation formally allowed him to leave the garrison and return to governing his territories. But the Spanish commander-in-chief blocked the fulfillment of the reciprocal part of the previously concluded agreement. He was guided solely by tactical considerations, in which the safety of the detachment took precedence. The division of the ingots concluded the economic phase, but did not resolve the issue of a safe exit from Cajamarca. The command began using formal pretexts to delay the removal of guards from the leader's quarters. The initial agreement was finally annulled unilaterally. The ransom room was finally completely empty, and the counted bars were moved to the tents. The tactical pause in the Spanish garrison following this event came to its inevitable conclusion. The infantrymen held their wealth in their hands, but their escape routes remained under threat of being cut off. Pizarro was about to make a decision that would determine the expedition's status and its safety. What would the command do to ensure a safe exit from the mountain fortress? Atahualpa became aware of the change in his status as the conditions of his detention grew harsher. He had ensured the completion of an extremely complex logistical task, but remained under the tight control of armed men. The Spanish commanders ceased visiting his quarters, delegating contact to rank-and-file interpreters. The number of guards at the door was increased, and patrols around the perimeter became more frequent. The diplomatic format of communication was definitively replaced by the strict format of prisoner detention. The pressure on the Spanish headquarters continued to mount due to new reports of movements in the mountains. Representatives of local factions competing with Atahualpa were passing on information about hidden weapons caches. They persistently informed Pizarro of preparations for a coordinated attack on the city gates. To verify this information, Hernando de Soto's mobile cavalry detachment was dispatched from the city. The departure of the cavalry temporarily reduced the overall firepower of the garrison remaining in the city. The remaining officers held an emergency meeting to analyze the current tactical situation. A risk assessment indicated that holding a key political figure significantly increased the likelihood of a siege. Unit commanders insisted on preemptively eliminating the main factor destabilizing the situation. The military council analyzed the possible options and chose the most drastic course of action. The decision to hold a formal tribunal was adopted by an absolute majority of votes. Francisco Pizarro spent a long time weighing the political costs of implementing such a radical plan. He understood that the removal of the head of state would raise complex legal issues in the Spanish chancellery. The presence of a living leader ensured at least a theoretical possibility of centralized control over the local population. But the priority of safely withdrawing the unit with its cargo outweighed long-term diplomatic calculations. The commander approved the protocol for conducting a swift military field court-martial of the prisoner. To legitimize the process, a panel of judges was quickly assembled from among the senior officers. The indictment consisted of a list of standard charges translated into the local language. The list included charges of organizing a mutiny, embezzlement of resources, and resistance to the colonial administration. The main emphasis was placed on the preparation of an armed attack on the Spanish garrison's location. The document was drafted in compliance with all the procedural formalities of the time. The ruler categorically rejected the charges, pointing out logical inconsistencies in the text. He reminded the tribunal of his full and precise fulfillment of his obligations regarding metal deliveries. Atahualpa noted the absence of any actual evidence of his troops moving toward the city. He logically constructed his defense, emphasizing the obvious benefits of a peaceful resolution to the conflict. However, his arguments were not properly recorded in the minutes and were ignored by the judges. The hearings were conducted in the shortest possible time without the involvement of independent observers. The interpreters working at the trial often distorted the meaning of complex terms and phrases. The panel of judges did not conduct cross-examinations, limiting themselves to a formal reading of the indictment. The entire process amounted to a technical procedure for formalizing a decision already made by the command. Military expediency completely supplanted an objective investigation of the circumstances. The final verdict was read immediately after the formal questioning of the few witnesses was completed. The tribunal ruled to apply the highest penalty of burning at the stake in accordance with established regulations. For Atahualpa, this specific method posed a serious problem within his belief system. Local traditions required physical preservation to ensure a proper transition to another state of being. He submitted a petition to replace the technical method of carrying out the tribunal's sentence. The Spanish command proposed an alternative method of execution in exchange for undergoing the baptismal rite. The ruler agreed to this formal condition, allowing a priest to perform the standard church ceremony. An entry was made in the registry regarding the new Christian name, Francisco, assigned prior to the execution of the verdict. This was the final administrative step before the physical elimination of the political leader. The documentation of the case was fully completed and filed with the expedition's reports. The complex multi-step maneuver, which began with a red line on the wall, had reached its conclusion. Tons of metal provided only a temporary pause in the unfolding of a harsh military scenario. The administration of vast territories was paralyzed by the decisions of the commanders of a small, isolated detachment. Preparations to carry out the tribunal's verdict began immediately after the papers were signed. The central square of Cajamarca was tightly cordoned off by armed Spanish soldiers. Evening fell, and the city was plunged into the anxious and cold mountain twilight. A simple wooden post had been erected in the center of the square for the formal proceedings. The soldiers stood in formation, intently surveying the surrounding architecture of the ancient city. The atmosphere was thick with the oppressive anticipation of an inevitable political denouement. Atahualpa was led out of his chambers under heavy armed guard. He walked slowly, maintaining his royal dignity even at this most difficult moment. His face showed no emotion as he approached the place where the sentence was to be pronounced. A Catholic priest walked beside him, monotonously reciting prayers in incomprehensible Latin. The Inca ruler looked one last time at the majestic mountains surrounding his city. The procedure was carried out incredibly quickly and methodically, without unnecessary delays. Atahualpa accepted his fate, realizing the complete collapse of all diplomatic hopes. Spanish officers stood aside, silently observing the conclusion of this historic chapter. It was purely an act of political calculation aimed at eliminating the main threat. There was no celebration among the ranks of the weary conquistadors at that moment. Shortly after the official ceremonies, a cavalry reconnaissance unit returned to the city. The unit's commander, Hernando de Soto, reported that there were no major enemy forces in the designated area. The intelligence regarding preparations for an assault turned out to be disinformation spread by local rival factions. The tribunal had reached its decision based on unverified and false tactical reports. This report caused serious tension among the expedition's senior officers. The command realized the scale of the analytical error made during the planning of the operation. A man who had strictly adhered to the terms of the agreement and had not been preparing an attack was removed. Pizarro justified his actions by the need to maintain discipline and reduce panic within the garrison. However, the fact that an incorrect strategic decision had been made was recorded in the history of this campaign. Internal trust among the various groups of officers was severely tested. This incident became a point of no return in the process of colonizing the South American continent. The practice of resorting to force definitively supplanted any attempts at diplomatic resolution. European forces demonstrated a willingness to nullify any treaties for the sake of tactical advantage. The ransom chamber became a thing of the past as a failed example of commodity money exchange. The administration of territories shifted to a phase of direct military control and governance. The removal of the supreme leader triggered the immediate fragmentation of the entire Inca administrative apparatus. Individual territorial units ceased to obey orders from a single central command. The monolithic state structure broke down into a multitude of isolated local units. This decentralization greatly simplified the task of advancing Spanish columns deep into the territory. The absence of a unified command prevented local forces from organizing an effective defense of the roads. The Spanish garrison completed preparations for a full-scale evacuation from the Cajamarca area. Heavy chests containing standard ingots were securely fastened to transport platforms. The column began moving south, leaving behind devastated warehouses. Ahead lay the ancient capital, awaiting integration into the new imperial system. The departure of the armed column from the city marked a shift in the tactics of the entire colonial campaign. The detachment moved along the stone highways of the Incas as the dominant military force in the region. Heavily laden mules slowly carried the standardized ingots over difficult mountain passes. A minimal garrison was left behind in Cajamarca to secure the rear lines. The main strike force, led by Pizarro, headed toward the central administrative hub. Along the way, the column observed mixed reactions from the local population to the change in power. A number of regional leaders, who had previously opposed the central government, provided the Spaniards with guides and provisions. Isolated mobile groups attempted to block narrow sections of the roads but quickly retreated under fire. Pizarro effectively integrated local allies into his transport and intelligence network. The combination of firearms and skillful recruitment ensured a steady pace of advance. The entry of European units into the capital of Cusco took place without large-scale street clashes. The architecture and layout of the city center confirmed the high level of development of local engineering. An inventory of the resources remaining in the capital revealed quantities of metal exceeding the collections in Cajamarca. The procedure for dismantling valuable elements from the walls of buildings was repeated in a more rigorous manner. The merging of the two financial streams ensured record profitability for the expedition. The old administrative system was completely replaced by a colonial model of territorial governance. Territories and labor resources were distributed among the expedition participants through the encomienda system. This mechanism legalized the compulsory labor of the local population in the mines and the agricultural sector. Inca urban planning norms were adapted to the standards of European colonial architecture. The new administration began a systematic inventory and redistribution of land holdings. The standardized timber logs were transported in a continuous stream to coastal ports. New logistics centers for storing export cargo were built at the intersections of these routes. The founding of Lima shifted the administrative focus from the mountainous regions to the convenient coastal zone. The continent's infrastructure was completely reoriented to serve maritime transport. The region was granted the status of a subordinate province with strictly regulated economic functions. Statistics on the success of Pizarro's enterprise triggered mass migration from the metropolis. Transport fleets delivered thousands of new contract workers eager to secure positions in the colony. The constant influx of trained personnel provided manpower for the expanding administrative apparatus. The region's demographic structure began to rapidly transform under the influence of the European element. Oceanic communications became the main supply line for the new settlements. The building where this massive logistical operation began lost its strategic significance. The empty stone walls of Cajamarca remained the starting point for the redistribution of global resources. The mechanisms set in motion within that rectangular space continued to operate with increasing intensity. The consequences of the decisions made there forever altered the economic routes of the two hemispheres. The flow of standardized bars arriving at Spanish ports radically altered the balance of power. The metropolis rapidly accumulated financial resources unavailable to other European states. This capital provided funding for the large-scale military campaigns of Charles V's regular army. A significant portion of the funds was directed toward the construction of monumental architectural complexes in the capital. Financial inflows from the colonies became the foundation of the Spanish crown's foreign policy dominance. However, the uncontrolled import of precious metals disrupted the stability of European financial systems. A sharp increase in the money supply triggered massive inflation, as recorded in historical documents. The cost of basic goods in domestic markets multiplied within a very short period of time. The currency's purchasing power declined faster than production capacity could adapt. The local manufacturing sector began to lose competitiveness amid rising raw material prices. Importing finished goods became a more economically viable solution than supporting domestic production. The country became directly dependent on the stability of maritime shipments from colonial ports. The decline in metal production in the provinces immediately impacted the metropolis's budget. The financial model, based on the extraction of finished resources, revealed its long-term vulnerability. The resources collected by order of Atahualpa triggered a complex process of economic stagnation. The careers of the officers who distributed metal in Cajamarca ended in a series of internal conflicts. The accumulated assets became the cause of intense administrative disputes over control of the territories. The disagreements escalated into armed clashes between various factions of the conquistadors. Francisco Pizarro was assassinated at his residence by a group of political opponents. Most participants in the first campaign lost their assets during the subsequent redistribution of spheres of influence. The centralized Inca system was completely dismantled beyond repair. The isolated territorial enclave in Vilcabamba was unable to exert any significant influence on the situation and was eliminated. Methods of coordination that did not rely on written records fell out of administrative use. Engineering and architectural codes were replaced by European building standards. The region's integration into the global trade network resulted in a complete transformation of its structure. The building in Cajamarca was preserved as a historical record of the expedition's early stage. The architectural proportions of this structure allow for an estimation of the actual volume of metal transferred. The red line on the stone wall has become a classic marker of unfulfilled diplomatic obligations. Measurements of the room are used to calculate the tonnage of resources extracted from the Inca economy. This space is a vivid example of the conversion of political pressure into an economic asset. The process of seizing the ransom demonstrated the effectiveness of the forceful method for solving logistical problems. The local administration operated within the framework of strict executive discipline and adherence to agreements. The European command was guided by the principles of tactical expediency and operational control. A pragmatic approach to risk mitigation ensured the expedition's objectives were met. Economic obligations were nullified immediately upon the transfer of material assets. The algorithms applied in this campaign became standard practice for subsequent territorial integrations. The extraction of resources at any cost established itself as a fundamental principle of colonial administration. Similar asset management schemes were scaled up on other continents over the course of several centuries. The Pizarro operation provided a working model for seizing control over large economic zones. Ethical considerations were completely excluded from protocols for interacting with local structures. An analysis of the results of this redistribution of wealth confirms the rigidity of historical processes. The large-scale movement of metals ensured the temporary superiority of one system over another. Huge volumes of gold altered the trajectories of global trade and demographics. The physical metal failed to ensure the personal safety of the participants in the initial transaction. The outcomes of this logistical operation are still being studied within the framework of economic history. Reaching the line on the wall marked the start of a process that spiraled out of control for both sides. The agreed-upon amount of metal was collected, but the original goal of the agreement was never achieved. We have seen how greed transformed an architectural structure into a tool for dismantling a political system. Atahualpa's golden chamber has become a historical symbol of how forceful solutions override any agreements. This episode demonstrates the harsh truth about the absorption of some economic models by others. How do you assess Francisco Pizarro's actions? As a brilliant tactical move under conditions of isolation, or as a dishonorable crime? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new in-depth historical analyses.